To be honest, I preferred the simplicity and the cheapness, if you like.
At 70 years old, Rowan Atkinson still carries the reputation of being the man who made the world laugh without ever needing a punchline. People saw the awkward walk, the puzzled expressions, the quiet mischief, and believed he lived a life as light-hearted as the character he played. But the truth is, nothing like the stories fans created. The man behind Mr. Bean has spent years battling a loneliness no one imagined. The pressure to always be perfect, the fear of disappointing millions, the exhaustion of being expected to laugh when all he wanted was silence. Every performance took something from him, something he never showed on screen. Audiences saw the physical comedy. They never saw the physical toll. They saw the grin. They never saw the nights he went home completely drained, asking himself why he felt so empty, despite giving joy to the entire world. There were moments when Rowan wanted to step away forever, moments when the fame felt heavier than anything he had prepared for. His anxiety, his self-doubt, and the private heartbreaks he kept hidden became the quiet tragedies shaping his life behind the camera. And the world never knew. How does a man who made millions laugh struggle to find joy for himself? Why did the pressure push him into long periods of isolation? And what truly happened in the years when Rowan seemed to vanish from the spotlight? This is where the real story begins. A story far more heartbreaking, far more human, and far more revealing than the silent comedy that shaped his legacy. To the world, Rowan Atkinson's public image has always been simple, almost mythic. The quiet genius who could turn ordinary moments into global comedy. For decades, he was the face of family-friendly humor, a universal language of laughter that needed no translation. Children adored him, adults respected him, and critics praised him as one of the greatest physical comedians of all time. People saw a man who seemed untouchable, calm, controlled, effortless. His performances looked so smooth and natural that audiences assumed he simply was Mr. Bean in real life. Carefree, childlike, joyful, unbothered by judgment or pressure. Everywhere he went, people expected the same expression, the same walk, the same playful awkwardness. But what the world celebrated most wasn't Rowan. It was the character he created. Fans assumed he was constantly cheerful, endlessly humorous, a man incapable of sadness. They believed he lived in a world as simple and innocent as the one he performed on screen. His silence became his charm. His stillness became his icon. His minimal expressions became the global signature of a man who, in truth, had an entire universe of emotions locked away from public eyes. Interviews only added to the illusion. Rowan stayed reserved, soft-spoken, polite, almost painfully private. This quietness made people think he was emotionally untouched by fame, as if he lived above the stress and chaos that consumed other celebrities. His intelligence and engineering background became another reason fans saw him as someone who always had control over everything in his life. Everywhere he went, the expectations were the same. Make us laugh. Give us Bean. Give us the character we love. But the public image became both a crown and a cage. The more famous Mr. Bean became, the more Rowan felt the pressure to protect the magic. He knew the world could never separate him from the character. He had created something too beloved, too universal. Yet every time fans approached him, every time cameras pointed in his direction, every time the world asked him to perform, it reminded him how little of Rowan Atkinson, the person people actually saw. He wasn't just admired, he was trapped by admiration. People applauded the perfection of his comedy, not realizing the cost of achieving that perfection. They saw the laughter, but not the discipline, the charm, but not the vulnerability, the success, but not the sacrifices. The world saw Rowan as the eternal comedian, without ever asking what the comedy cost him. And as the public image grew brighter, his private struggles grew darker. A contrast that would eventually define the rest of his life story. Behind the polished interviews and the global fame, Rowan Atkinson lived a life almost no one truly understood. Off camera, he was nothing like the character that defined him. There was no exaggerated walk, no playful innocence, no comedic chaos surrounding him. Instead, Rowan moved with intention, spoke carefully, and carried himself with a seriousness that often surprised the few people allowed into his inner circle. He was analytical, he was observant, and at times he was deeply withdrawn. Rowan's sense of humor in private was subtle. Quiet remarks, dry wit, sharp intelligence disguised beneath gentle pauses. He didn't crave attention. He didn't chase crowds. He avoided the noise of celebrity gatherings and preferred small, controlled environments where he could think, reflect, and breathe without expectation. But underneath that calm exterior lived something much more complex, a lifelong struggle with self-doubt. For years, Rowan questioned whether he was truly good enough. Not as Mr. Bean, not as a performer, but as a person trying to navigate a world that constantly wanted more from him than he could give. The pressure to be perfectly funny haunted him, especially because his brand of comedy required absolute precision. One wrong movement, one mistimed reaction, one break in rhythm, and the entire performance could fall apart. This constant demand for perfection followed him everywhere. Into rehearsals, onto sets, into his home, even into his sleep. And beneath that pressure lived fear, not of failure, but of disappointing the millions who believed in him. Rowan understood that fans didn't separate the man from the character. If he made a mistake, it would feel like Mr. Bean made a mistake. And if Mr. Bean broke, a piece of the world's childhood would break with him. So he kept silent. He kept composed. He kept everything hidden, including the emotional storms that shaped him. Rowan was also intensely sensitive, though he rarely showed it. Moments that others brushed off stayed with him for years. Criticism cut deeper than anyone realized. Negative headlines, even small ones, left him awake at night replaying every detail, wondering if he'd done something wrong. The world saw his quiet nature as confidence, but inside, Rowan battled insecurities that followed him since childhood. He was a man who loved privacy, but lived inside the glare of global fame. A man who valued quiet, but was adored for chaos. A man who sought peace, but was celebrated for being unpredictable. In the rare moments when he allowed himself to open up, usually to close family or trusted friends, glimpses of the hidden self appeared. Exhaustion, vulnerability, and a deep longing to be understood not as a character, but simply as Rowan. He was grateful for his success, but emotionally overwhelmed by the shadow it cast over his real identity. And as that shadow grew larger with every passing year, Rowan began slipping deeper into isolation, a silent retreat from the world that adored him. Because the more the world loved Mr. Bean, the more Rowan Atkinson began to disappear. Long before the world knew the name Rowan Atkinson, he was simply a quiet boy, growing up in the English countryside. The last person anyone expected to become a global comedy icon, born into a modest, disciplined household. Rowan was surrounded by structure and routine from an early age. His father, a farmer and company director, believed in hard work and humility. His mother cared deeply for her children. But the family environment was calm, orderly, and often emotionally restrained. Rowan was different from other children. He was painfully shy, rarely spoke unless necessary, and preferred observing the world rather than participating in it. Teachers described him as intelligent but withdrawn. While other kids ran across fields, shouted, and played loudly, Rowan stayed on the edges, studying facial expressions, watching movements, absorbing the small details that most people overlooked. No one knew it then, but he was building the foundation for the most expressive, silent character the world would ever see. His early years were marked by a constant internal battle. Rowan struggled socially. Simple interactions exhausted him. Speaking in front of classmates felt terrifying. The thought of being the center of attention made him retreat even further into himself. But within that quietness, something else was forming, an incredible imagination, a sharp sense of timing, and an ability to create entire worlds in his mind without saying a word. Rowan found comfort in machines, engines, and structure. That's why he drifted toward engineering. Something logical, predictable, controllable. He excelled academically, eventually winning a place at Oxford University to study electrical engineering. For a young man who feared social interaction, Oxford was overwhelming at first. But it was also the place where his life took an unexpected turn. One evening, a friend convinced him to join a university sketch group. Rowan hesitated. Performing in front of others felt impossible. But he walked onto that small stage anyway, trembling, nervous, completely uncertain of what would happen. And then something remarkable occurred. The moment he stepped under the lights, the shy boy disappeared. His body loosened, his expression sharpened. His mind clicked into a rhythm he didn't even know he possessed. Without speaking much, he made an entire room erupt in laughter. Not because of what he said, but because of what he did. Rowan discovered something fundamental that night. On stage, his silence wasn't a weakness. It was his power. The very thing he feared in his everyday life became the tool that unlocked his true identity. His face became his voice, his body became his language, his stillness became his punchline. From that moment, the course of his life shifted. He continued performing in student reviews, each time delivering more confidence, sharper timing, and deeper physical control than anyone expected. His professors saw an engineering prodigy. His friends saw something else entirely. A performer unlike any other. Someone who didn't need words to command attention. This dual life, engineer by day, silent comedic force by night, shaped the man he would become. But with every performance, another truth settled quietly into Rowan's heart. He wasn't just good at this. He was made for it. Yet even as his talent grew, so did the internal conflict. Engineering offered stability, predictability, safety. Comedy offered uncertainty, exposure, vulnerability. Choosing the stage meant choosing a life where the world would constantly look at him, the very thing he had spent his entire childhood avoiding. But destiny rarely waits for permission. By the time Rowan left Oxford, he had built a reputation that reached far beyond the university walls. Casting directors took notice. Producers began calling. Opportunities he never dreamed of were suddenly in front of him. And beneath all the fear and doubt, Rowan felt something else. Something rare. Something powerful. He felt seen. For the first time in his life, the quiet boy from the countryside realized that the very thing that made him different could be the thing that changed his life forever. But Rowan had no idea that stepping into the spotlight would eventually come with a price far heavier than anything he faced in childhood. A price that would follow him for the rest of his career. The moment Rowan Atkinson stepped out of university life and into the real world, something inside him ignited. A spark that would shape not just his career, but the entire future of global comedy. He didn't burst onto the scene with loud jokes or dramatic performances. Instead, he entered quietly, almost hesitantly, as if unsure whether he truly belonged. But every stage, every rehearsal room, every casting opportunity revealed something unmistakable. Rowan possessed a kind of talent no one could teach. His early performances in the late 70s were a revelation. While other comedians relied on dialogue-heavy routines, Rowan did something different. He stripped comedy down to its essence. A single raised eyebrow, a slow, deliberate turn, a confused blink at exactly the right moment. These micro-movements created an impact bigger than any punchline. Directors watched him in awe, realizing they weren't just observing a comedian. They were witnessing a mind engineered for precision. Rowan's spark didn't come from ambition. It came from instinct. He studied timing the way an engineer studies circuitry, with focus, discipline, and meticulous analysis. He rehearsed scenes again and again, adjusting tiny details until the movement felt mathematically perfect. What the audience saw as spontaneous chaos was actually the result of hours of calculation. And that contrast became his artistic identity. Quiet preparation, explosive performance. His breakthrough opportunity arrived when he joined the cast of Not, the 9 o'clock news. It was sharp, witty, politically bold. Nothing like the silent comedy he would later become famous for. Yet Rowan adapted instantly, using his expressive face and quick reflexes to stand out from the cast. His sketches went viral before viral even existed. People quoted his characters, replayed his scenes, and began recognizing him on the streets. Yet even in those early days of success, Rowan felt an internal divide. He was grateful for the acclaim, yet deeply uncomfortable with attention. He was proud of his craft, yet terrified of interviews. Fame offered him visibility, but visibility triggered the insecurities he had carried since childhood. As the world began to notice him, Rowan quietly struggled with the fear that it could all collapse as quickly as it began. But the spark kept pushing him forward. During a quiet creative session, Rowan developed an idea that came from the deepest parts of his identity. A character who didn't need words, didn't need dialogue, didn't need cultural translation. A character who expressed everything through silence. A reflection of who Rowan had always been. The shy observer, the quiet thinker, the outsider who communicated through emotion instead of speech. That character would eventually become Mr. Bean. The idea felt risky. Television was ruled by fast-paced dialogue and sharp comedic banter. A nearly silent character? Many believed it would fail, but Rowan trusted his instincts. And more importantly, he understood that if he didn't try this now, he might never try it at all. When he performed the character for the first time in a small venue, the reaction was instantaneous. The audience erupted into laughter, unable to explain why they were laughing so hard. Rowan didn't move quickly or loudly. He moved deliberately, choosing each gesture with surgical precision. The performance was so unique that people stopped discussing whether it would succeed and instead asked when they could see more. The spark had officially become a flame. Producers noticed. Networks became interested. Conversations shifted from curiosity to enthusiasm. It was clear Rowan had tapped into a type of comedy that transcended culture, language, and age. Something universal, something rare, something only he could deliver. But with that spark came a new pressure. The expectation to keep pushing boundaries, to keep perfecting the art of silence, to become the face of a character so powerful he could never escape it. Rowan didn't know it yet, but the birth of Mr. Bean would eventually define his life, his identity, and his deepest struggles. For now, though, all he knew was this. He had found the character that would change everything. And the world was about to witness a comedic revolution born from the mind of a man who barely spoke a word. The breakthrough didn't happen gradually. It arrived like a cultural earthquake. The moment Mr. Bean appeared on television for the first time in 1990, the world stopped, stared, and laughed in a way it hadn't laughed in decades. The character was strange, awkward, unpredictable, and yet instantly lovable. And Rowan Atkinson, the quiet, withdrawn boy from the countryside, had transformed into the creator of one of the most recognizable characters in the history of entertainment. What made the breakthrough extraordinary wasn't just its success, it was its universality. No language barriers, no complex dialogue, just pure human expression. Something everyone on the planet could understand. From the very first episode, audiences felt something rare: comfort. Mr. Bean reminded people of childhood innocence, of simplicity, of the small mistakes everyone makes but never talks about. Rowan tapped into humanity's shared awkwardness, and he did it with nothing more than body movement, facial expression, and timing so precise it felt supernatural. The numbers were staggering. Within months, Mr. Bean wasn't just a British show, it became a global phenomenon. Countries that rarely agreed on anything agreed on this. Mr. Bean was irresistible. People watched even when they didn't understand English. Children laughed, parents laughed, grandparents laughed. Even critics were stunned. Rowan had done something almost impossible. He created a character that united generations, cultures, and continents. But behind the scenes, the pressure grew heavier with every success. Producers wanted more episodes. Networks demanded spin-offs. Brands begged for commercials. Entire nations wanted Bean appearances, live events, endorsements. Rowan suddenly became the center of an international spotlight, something he never wanted, never asked for, and never felt comfortable with. He had created a character loved by billions, but with that love came suffocating expectations. Every performance had to be perfect. Every scene had to be flawless. Every movement had to be engineered down to the smallest detail. And Rowan was the kind of person who couldn't deliver anything less than perfection. He spent hours analyzing scenes frame by frame, adjusting the slightest eyebrow raise or pause. He rehearsed until exhaustion, pushing himself to physical limits most actors never approached. He carried the entire brand on his shoulders, terrified that one poorly executed joke could tarnish the legacy he had worked so hard to build. The world thought Rowan lived a joyful, carefree life. But the truth was much different. Behind closed doors, the success came with emotional exhaustion. The pressure turned into anxiety. The fame turned into isolation. And the expectations began to chip away at the man behind the character. Yet despite the internal struggles, Rowan continued delivering brilliance. He brought the character to movies, to global events, to comedic sketches that broke television records. Children born in the 90s grew up with him. New generations discovered him through reruns and online clips. Mr. Bean became more than a character. He became a symbol of innocence, a symbol of universal laughter, a symbol of simplicity in a chaotic world. But for Rowan, the biggest realization came quietly. Mr. Bean was no longer just his creation. He belonged to the world. This was the breakthrough everyone celebrated. The moment Rowan Atkinson became a legend. But it was also the beginning of a new shadow, one that would follow him for the rest of his life. Because becoming a global icon came with a cost he was never emotionally prepared to pay. By the mid-1990s and early 2000s, Rowan Atkinson wasn't just famous. He had become a global cultural monument. This was the period many call the Crown, the era when Rowan sat at the absolute peak of worldwide entertainment. Children wore Mr. Bean t-shirts, adults quoted his scenes, and families across 190-plus countries watched his episodes together. The Crown didn't come from awards or industry titles. It came from something much rarer: universal recognition. There are celebrities, and then there are figures whose faces alone define an era. Rowan was the latter. Wherever he traveled, crowds gathered instantly. People didn't just want autographs. They wanted moments, memories, a small piece of the character who had become a part of their childhood. Tourists in London would reenact Bean's steps. Toy shops sold Bean dolls, books, puzzles, stationery, even lunchboxes. The Yellow Mini became a moving shrine to nostalgia. Each scene, each episode, each expression entered the world's collective memory. But the true power of Rowan's Crown wasn't in the merchandise or the global screenings. It was in the emotional impact he had on people. Families dealing with stress watched Bean to feel lighter. Hospital patients found comfort in his episodes. Refugee camps played his show because it was one of the few forms of entertainment that everyone, regardless of culture or language, could understand. Through silence, Rowan had given the world something louder than words: relief. Yet while the world celebrated him, Rowan felt the crown grow heavier every year. He was no longer just Rowan Atkinson. He was Mr. Bean, everywhere, forever. And that identity, while deeply cherished by millions, began to trap the man behind it. Producers expected perfection. Fans expected magic. Journalists expected answers. And Rowan, a man who always valued privacy and calm, felt himself becoming a prisoner inside the global success he created. He loved the character, but he feared what the character was taking from him: his anonymity, his peace, even parts of his personal life. Success demanded sacrifice, and Rowan paid more than the world ever knew. During this peak era, he struggled to maintain normal relationships. Simple tasks like grocery shopping became impossible without being crowded or photographed. A quiet walk turned into a public spectacle. Restaurants became uncomfortable. Airports became overwhelming. The shy boy who once avoided attention was now one of the most recognizable faces on Earth. But Rowan never let the world see his discomfort. He always remained polite, always calm, always controlled. The crown also came with another pressure: creative expectation. People believed Rowan could produce endless Bean episodes forever. They didn't understand the physical and mental energy required to maintain that level of precision. Every movement had to be rehearsed. Every expression had to land. Every sequence had to feel natural, even when it was constructed with intense calculation. The perfection the world adored became the burden Rowan carried alone. And then came the biggest fear: the realization that no matter what he created next, the world would always compare it to Mr. Bean. That fear haunted him. It made every new project feel risky, every script revision feel intimidating. He didn't want to disappoint the millions who had attached their childhood memories to his work. But even in his struggle, Rowan continued to rise. Movies expanded the Bean universe. International releases shattered records. Animation series kept new generations engaged. His talent also flourished in other roles: Johnny English, Blackadder, stage performances, each showing the world that he was far more than a silent comedian. Still, nothing could escape the shadow of Bean. This was Rowan's golden era, a time of unmatched admiration, global influence, and cultural immortality. But behind the crown was a man slowly realizing that even success has a breaking point, and the weight of becoming a legend would soon begin to change everything. With fame comes reward, but with reward comes an unspoken toll. For Rowan Atkinson, the price of success was far higher than anyone could imagine. The world saw laughter, applause, and global recognition. What they didn't see were the countless hours of isolation, the pressure to maintain perfection, and the emotional exhaustion that accompanied his every performance. Rowan's life became a careful balancing act. Every public appearance was rehearsed in his mind, every smile meticulously measured, every gesture calibrated to match the exact persona the world expected. The freedom he had once felt in performing was slowly replaced with fear. Fear of slipping, fear of judgment, fear of disappointing millions who didn't even know him as a man, only as a character. Behind the scenes, Rowan's personal life suffered. Relationships were strained by his relentless schedule, and the demands of his career left little room for family or friendships. Even simple pleasures, a quiet walk, a casual meal, a spontaneous moment of joy, became near impossible when every move risked public attention or media scrutiny. He began to feel trapped in his own creation. The physical toll was just as severe. Mr. Bean's comedy relied on extreme precision and control, often pushing Rowan's body into contortions, falls, and stunts that could have injured any ordinary performer. Hours of rehearsal and filming took a quiet, but relentless toll on his health. The laughter the world celebrated was built on intense discipline, physical strain, and repeated exhaustion. Yet the greatest cost was emotional. Rowan carried a constant fear that the world would no longer accept him, that one misstep, one poorly timed expression, or one failed joke could unravel the image everyone loved. Behind closed doors, he wrestled with anxiety and self-doubt, questions that never left him even in the most triumphant moments. He became a man who smiled endlessly in public, while privately struggling to reconcile the character with the person he truly was. As years passed, Rowan began to make difficult choices. Opportunities came in abundance, but he realized that not every role, not every show, not every commercial could be pursued without losing himself further. He had to protect the man behind the laughter, the quiet, reflective, intensely private Rowan Atkinson, even if it meant stepping back from the very world that adored him. And yet, stepping back carried its own price. While retreat offered relief, it also brought guilt. Guilt that he wasn't giving enough to fans, to colleagues, to a world that had placed him on a pedestal. The crown of success was heavy, and the deeper he went into protecting himself, the more isolated he became from the life he had once loved. Rowan's story reminds us of a hard truth. The price of brilliance is not always visible. For every moment of triumph, there are hours of struggle. For every global laugh, there is a personal cost. And for every legacy admired by millions, there is a private battle waged in silence, often unseen, yet profoundly shaping the person we rarely know. The world celebrated Mr. Bean. Rowan celebrated fleeting moments of peace, and in that delicate balance between adoration and isolation, the real tragedy of Rowan Atkinson quietly unfolded. Even legends are not immune to vulnerability. For Rowan Atkinson, the fall was not dramatic in the tabloids, nor was it a scandal that shook the world. It was quieter, slower, and far more devastating. A gradual erosion of the life he had built, both professionally and personally. As the 2000s progressed, the world continued to adore Mr. Bean, but Rowan's energy and passion began to waver. The pressure of maintaining perfection, the constant scrutiny, and the unrelenting demands of fame started to weigh heavier. The character that had once brought him joy now confined him. Every performance carried an invisible tension, a fear that he could no longer meet expectations. Opportunities arose for new projects, for reinvention, for exploration beyond Bean. But Rowan hesitated. The world expected the familiar, the quiet genius of silent comedy, and he feared stepping outside that comfort zone. Each hesitation felt like a betrayal to fans, and yet every push forward felt like a betrayal to himself. He was trapped between two forces, public expectation and personal survival. His private life also began to fracture. The relentless work schedule, long hours of filming, and constant travel made sustaining relationships almost impossible. Close friends drifted away, family connections weakened, and Rowan found himself increasingly isolated. Even moments of celebration carried a hollow edge. Applause that echoed in empty rooms, smiles that masked exhaustion. In the world of performance, one misstep is inevitable. For Rowan, it came in subtle forms. Minor injuries on set from physically demanding scenes, moments of forgotten lines, instances where timing slipped, all magnified by the pressure to remain flawless. Every small error felt catastrophic in his own mind. Perfection had become a burden heavier than recognition could justify. The fall was also emotional. Anxiety became a constant companion, self-doubt, a relentless whisper. Rowan had learned to hide these feelings, to appear unshakable in public. But in private, the cracks deepened. Nights of restlessness replaced the calm he once found in preparation. Days of solitude replaced the excitement of creation. The man who had once thrived in observation now struggled to observe himself without judgment. Yet, Rowan did not collapse entirely. He persevered, choosing carefully which projects to pursue, conserving his energy, and retreating when the world demanded too much. But the brilliance of his early years began to dim in public memory. While fans still adored him, new generations saw less of his work, and the timeless magic of Mr. Bean slowly faded from headlines. This fall was not catastrophic in the eyes of the world. There were no scandals, no bankruptcies, no public disgrace. But for Rowan, it was profoundly personal. The fall was the slow realization that even brilliance carries fragility, that the very success he had built his life upon could also isolate him, pressure him, and threaten his peace of mind. The world continued to cheer, oblivious to the quiet struggle behind the scenes. And Rowan, like so many brilliant minds before him, learned that sometimes the most significant battles are fought away from the spotlight, in silence, and in the lonely spaces of one's own mind. The fall was not the end of his story, but it marked a turning point, a moment where Rowan would need to confront the cost of fame and the reality of life beyond the laughter he had created. After decades in the public eye, Rowan Atkinson entered a period many would later describe as the silence. It was not a disappearance in headlines or a retreat from creativity entirely, but a deliberate stepping back, a conscious withdrawal from the relentless demands of fame, expectation, and the unending performance of perfection. For Rowan, silence was both refuge and reckoning. He no longer needed to entertain the world every day, and in that quiet, he confronted the truth of what his life had become. The laughter that once filled rooms, studios, and living rooms worldwide was replaced with reflection, solitude, and the weight of decades spent performing under constant scrutiny. He withdrew not out of fear, but necessity. The constant pressure, the fear of failing, the physical and emotional toll of embodying a character beloved by millions had left scars invisible to the outside world. Silence became a sanctuary, a place where he could be Rowan Atkinson, not Mr. Bean, not Johnny English, not the icon everyone expected him to be. In private, Rowan reflected on a career that had brought him immeasurable success, yet demanded immeasurable sacrifice. The roles he had created were timeless, but they came with a cost. Relationships strained by absence, moments of joy overshadowed by expectation, and an inner voice that had spent years quietly questioning whether the laughter was ever truly his own. The silence also offered clarity. Rowan realized that much of his identity had been entwined with performance. He had poured himself into characters that were adored globally, yet the man behind them had remained hidden. In that quiet, he began to rediscover who he was beyond the comedy, beyond the fame, beyond the persona the world had attached to him. He found solace in small things: early morning walks, time with family, quiet reading, and occasional writing. The silence was not emptiness. It was a necessary pause, a recalibration of a life that had been defined by public expectation for too long. Rowan began to understand that his value was not measured solely by applause or ratings, but by the ability to exist authentically in the spaces where no one was watching. And yet, even in silence, the world occasionally reached out. Offers for new roles, invitations to return to screens, reminders of his legacy, all served as both temptation and test. Could Rowan step back into the world he had shaped without losing himself? Could he embrace the crown and the burden simultaneously? Or had he finally learned that true survival meant protecting the man behind the mask? The silence, while invisible to the public, was perhaps the most courageous act of Rowan's life. It was a refusal to sacrifice his peace for the endless demands of adoration, and a quiet assertion that the man he had been, the man he had built, deserved space to simply exist. In that silence, Rowan Atkinson discovered something few stars ever experience: the freedom to define life on his own terms, even after decades of living in the world's spotlight. The silence was not the end. It was the preparation for something greater. The next chapter, where reflection, resilience, and the enduring brilliance of Rowan's mind would find their place beyond the shadows of Mr. Bean. After years of silence, reflection, and cautious retreat, Rowan Atkinson began the slow, deliberate process of returning, not just to screens, but to the world in a way that was measured, controlled, and deeply personal. This was not the same explosive rise he had experienced decades earlier. There was no immediate frenzy, no instant flood of global attention. Instead, it was quiet, intentional, and profoundly human. Rowan understood something few celebrities ever truly grasp. Returning to the public eye after years of retreat is not about reclaiming fame. It is about reclaiming oneself. For Rowan, this meant approaching the world on his own terms, choosing projects that resonated with his creative instincts, collaborating only with people he trusted, and allowing himself to navigate the balance between visibility and privacy with care. The first step in his return was subtle: small projects, carefully curated appearances, select interviews that allowed him to speak, not as Mr. Bean, but as Rowan Atkinson, the man who had spent decades perfecting silence, who had created a character beloved by millions, and who had carried a private burden few would ever understand. Each decision was strategic. Each choice reinforced the message. Rowan was here, yes, but he would not be swallowed again by the machinery of fame. In film, his return began with roles that demanded precision, intelligence, and depth, not only comedic talent. He revisited characters like Johnny English, but with a new layer of sophistication. The performances were richer, informed by years of reflection, lived experience, and a deeper understanding of timing, expression, and subtlety. Where earlier works had relied heavily on physical comedy, Rowan's return demonstrated his mastery over nuance, dialogue, and the quiet art of observation. He was no longer just the man who fell over furniture for laughs. He was an actor, a thinker, and a craftsman, demonstrating a breadth that audiences had only glimpsed in flashes during his career. At the same time, Rowan's return was not only professional, but personal. He began reconnecting with life outside the studio, finding joy in the world he had previously avoided. Long walks, quiet cafes, moments spent with family and close friends. These became the foundation upon which his renewed life was built. The very solitude that once felt suffocating now provided him with clarity, confidence, and a quiet strength. He had learned that the key to surviving fame is not hiding from it entirely, but engaging with it selectively, deliberately, and mindfully. Fans noticed the difference. The public reception of his return was unlike the frenzy of his early career. There was no need for spectacle. Instead, there was appreciation, respect, and an almost reverent acknowledgement of a man who had spent years quietly rebuilding himself. People saw not just the character, but the human behind it, the intelligence, the wit, and the humility that had always existed beneath the mask of Mr. Bean. This return was also marked by experimentation. Rowan began exploring formats he had never tried before: smaller-scale theater, performances, voice work, guest appearances in television, and projects that allowed him to mentor younger talent. He found a new kind of fulfillment in helping others develop their craft, passing on the lessons learned from decades of success, struggle, and personal reflection. In guiding others, he also guided himself, recognizing the importance of legacy, teaching, and influence beyond immediate fame. Emotionally, the return allowed Rowan to confront the shadows of his past, the pressures, anxieties, and silent struggles that had accompanied the crown of success were no longer hidden. He could acknowledge them, speak about them cautiously, and even use them as fuel for his performances. This vulnerability, though subtle, became a new dimension in his work. Audiences sensed it, even if they could not name it. A depth behind the familiar comedy, a resonance that elevated every role he undertook. The return was not linear. There were setbacks, moments when public expectation clashed with personal comfort. Times when a role felt overwhelming or a project too invasive. Rowan had learned to say no, a skill that had been impossible during the peak of his career. Refusal became a form of self-preservation, a tool to maintain the balance between creative freedom and personal peace. Every yes was intentional, every no was protective. His cautious reemergence also allowed Rowan to experiment creatively in ways that had been impossible earlier. For the first time, he could merge his early physical comedy with nuanced storytelling, combining silence and expression with dialogue, timing with intention and humor with reflection. The result was not simply a return to popularity. It was an evolution, a demonstration of mastery, of wisdom, of artistic control. He no longer needed to prove himself. He only needed to create work that felt authentic. Perhaps most importantly, the return gave Rowan a renewed sense of ownership over his life. Fame had once defined him. Expectations had once confined him. Now, he moved deliberately through the world, choosing projects, collaborations, and moments of visibility that aligned with who he truly was. In doing so, he reclaimed a freedom he had lost in the pursuit of perfection, recognition, and audience approval. Audiences responded to this return not just with laughter, but with admiration. They appreciated the man who had given them decades of joy and now returned with humility, sophistication, and quiet confidence. New generations discovered Rowan Atkinson not as a relic of the past, but as a living, evolving artist whose work transcended age, language, and cultural barriers. The return also allowed Rowan to reconcile with his own legacy. He began acknowledging the personal sacrifices he had made, the long nights, the physical demands, the emotional toll, and recognized how these shaped not just his career, but the man he had become. He could look back on Mr. Bean and Johnny English with pride, but without regret. He understood that his genius had always been intertwined with struggle, and that every performance, every laugh, and every challenge had contributed to the depth of his craft. In private conversations, Rowan reflected on the journey. The shy boy from the countryside, the disciplined student at Oxford, the performer struggling with anxiety, the global icon trapped in expectation, all of these selves coexisted within him. The return allowed him to integrate these identities, to honor each stage of his life, and to move forward with clarity, purpose, and a renewed sense of peace. Through his return, Rowan demonstrated something rare in the world of fame: the ability to reclaim oneself after decades of external pressure. He did not chase relevance. He did not seek validation. Instead, he acted intentionally, thoughtfully, and with the wisdom that only comes from experience. In doing so, he proved that legacy is not simply what the world remembers. It is how a person navigates the balance between brilliance, struggle, and self-preservation. Rowan's return is also a lesson in resilience. He showed that stepping back, pausing, and protecting oneself is not weakness, it is strategy. That creativity can flourish not just under pressure, but in quiet, reflective spaces. That the true measure of a career is not only the accolades and adoration, but the ability to survive, adapt, and evolve while remaining true to one's inner self. The man who once carried the crown, bore the price, and endured the fall had emerged renewed. He moved through the world not as a symbol of perfection, but as a living testament to persistence, artistry, and courage. The return was not about reclaiming what was lost, it was about embracing what remained, refining it, and sharing it with the world on his own terms. Today, Rowan Atkinson continues to inspire not just through laughter, but through his quiet wisdom. His return is a story of survival, of reflection, and of mastery, a demonstration that even after decades in the spotlight, after struggle, isolation, and personal trials, it is possible to reclaim life with dignity, intention, and grace. Rowan's journey reminds us that brilliance is never linear, that silence can be as powerful as applause, that stepping back is not retreat, it is preparation, and that the greatest triumphs often emerge after the longest struggles. The world welcomed him back, not merely as Mr. Bean or Johnny English, but as Rowan Atkinson, the man who endured, reflected, and returned, proving that life beyond the laughter can be just as compelling, just as courageous, and just as profound. Rowan Atkinson's story is one of brilliance, struggle, and enduring influence, a story that transcends the boundaries of comedy and enters the realm of human truth. At 70, the legacy he leaves behind is not measured merely in awards, box office numbers, or viral television moments. It is measured in the countless lives touched by laughter, the subtle ways he redefined performance, and the enduring impact of a man who turned silence into a universal language. From the very beginning, Rowan's approach to comedy was revolutionary. He rejected conventional dialogue-heavy humor and relied instead on precision, observation, and the expressive power of the human body. He understood that a single gesture, a raised eyebrow, or a carefully timed pause could elicit laughter more profound than any scripted joke. Mr. Bean was not just a character. It was a masterclass in human communication, a demonstration that emotion, expression, and timing can bridge cultural, linguistic, and generational divides. His legacy is evident everywhere. Children around the world imitate Bean's antics. Theater students study his timing. Comedians dissect his methodology. Every corner of the globe has, at some point, encountered the quiet genius of Rowan Atkinson, even those who don't know his name. Through his performances, he created a shared experience, a universal touchstone of joy that crosses borders, languages, and societal divides. Yet the significance of Rowan's legacy is not only in what he created on screen, but in how he navigated the personal cost of his craft. Few understand the discipline, the mental fortitude, and the emotional resilience required to perform at his level. Years of perfectionism, anxiety, and self-imposed pressure shaped him as much as his talent. The quiet struggles that accompanied fame were invisible to most, yet they informed every gesture, every expression, every subtle nuance that made his performances timeless. Rowan's influence extends far beyond Mr. Bean. His work in Blackadder, Johnny English, and countless sketches revealed his versatility, intelligence, and commitment to craft. Each role demonstrated a blend of wit, subtlety, and physicality that redefined what comedy could be. He showed that humor need not be loud or brash to resonate. It can be refined, deliberate, and deeply human. His performances became lessons in observation, timing, and emotional truth, techniques that young performers study and emulate decades later. But perhaps the most profound aspect of his legacy lies in his example of resilience. Rowan's career was marked not just by success, but by the careful navigation of the human cost of fame. He retreated when necessary, protected his personal life, and chose projects with intentionality. In doing so, he demonstrated that it is possible to maintain integrity, dignity, and authenticity. Even in a world that he showed that personal well-being and creative excellence are not mutually exclusive, but interdependent. Beyond his artistry, Rowan's legacy is also defined by humility. Despite being one of the most recognized faces in the world, he remained deeply private, careful to separate the character from the man. He allowed audiences to enjoy the comedy while guarding the core of his identity. This careful balance of visibility and privacy has inspired not only performers but ordinary individuals seeking to navigate the pressures of expectation, career, and personal life. Rowan demonstrated that one could be brilliant, influential, and adored without surrendering one's soul to the demands of the public. The cultural imprint of his work is immeasurable. Mr. Bean became a phenomenon, precisely because it was accessible to everyone. Children who could not read or speak English understood him instantly. Elderly viewers found comfort in his slapstick yet tender comedy. International audiences recognized a universal truth in every silent expression. Human vulnerability is funny, relatable, and profoundly moving. Rowan's ability to turn simple human moments into shared global experiences represents a legacy few artists can claim. Rowan's influence is also deeply personal. Many who grew up watching him recall the profound joy and comfort his work brought. In hospitals, schools, refugee camps, and homes worldwide, Mr. Bean became more than entertainment. He became a source of solace and laughter during difficult times. Rowan's legacy is, therefore, not only artistic but emotional, a testament to the power of creativity to heal, unite, and inspire. Yet the true depth of his legacy is revealed when considering the man behind the characters. Rowan endured pressures few understood, maintained discipline few could imagine, and faced personal challenges quietly, without spectacle. His story is one of perseverance in the face of expectation, of navigating fame with intentionality, and of reclaiming one's life while contributing immeasurably to global culture. In a world that often equates visibility with virtue, Rowan demonstrated that true greatness is measured by integrity, resilience, and the quiet mastery of one's craft. Rowan's legacy is also a lesson in evolution. He did not remain static. He adapted, reflected, and grew. His early physical comedy gave way to nuanced performances that blended timing, dialogue, and subtle emotional depth. His return to public life after years of retreat and reflection exemplified the power of careful reinvention. He proved that a career could span decades, that art could evolve, and that personal boundaries could coexist with professional achievement. In essence, Rowan Atkinson's legacy is multifaceted. It is artistic, personal, cultural, and emotional. It is the universal laughter of Mr. Bean. It is the clever dialogue of Blackadder. It is the wit and precision of Johnny English. It is the silent resilience behind every public appearance. It is the example of a man who navigated fame without losing himself, who understood the cost of brilliance, and who returned with wisdom, dignity, and continued relevance. For aspiring performers, his story is a blueprint. Mastery demands discipline, visibility requires sacrifice, and true artistry blends talent with self-awareness. For audiences, his story is a gift. Laughter is a shared human experience, transcending borders, languages, and generations. For the world at large, Rowan Atkinson's life is proof that the combination of creativity, perseverance, and authenticity can leave a mark that endures far beyond the applause. And perhaps the most striking aspect of his legacy is this: despite the pressure, the fame, and the personal cost, Rowan maintained joy in creation. He reminded the world that comedy is not simply about entertainment. It is about empathy, observation, and connection. Every raised eyebrow, every paused movement, every carefully orchestrated fall was a testament to the meticulous care of a man who understood that humor is both art and gift. In the end, Rowan Atkinson's legacy is as much about the laughter he created as it is about the life he preserved. He showed that success is not only measured in popularity, but in the ability to navigate its challenges with grace. That behind every iconic character is a human story, often fraught with struggle, yet capable of extraordinary impact. And that even in silence, one can communicate, inspire, and change the world. Rowan Atkinson's life teaches us that brilliance carries cost, that fame carries responsibility, and that artistry carries truth. His legacy is not just the smiles of millions, it is the quiet courage of a man who gave the world laughter while protecting the essence of himself. It is the proof that true legends endure not merely because of what they achieve publicly, but because of how they navigate their inner lives, overcome adversity, and continue to create meaning long after the spotlight dims. As the world looks back on his extraordinary career, Rowan Atkinson stands as a testament to the power of comedy, the depth of human resilience, and the enduring value of authenticity. His characters will continue to evoke laughter, his performances will continue to teach, and his life story will continue to inspire, a legacy that will resonate for generations yet to come. Rowan Atkinson has shown us that a legacy is more than fame. It is influence, it is integrity, it is courage, and above all, it is the ability to touch lives quietly, profoundly, and forever through the art of human expression. For 70 years, he has been many things: shy boy, disciplined student, global icon, silent genius, and reflective artist. And now, his legacy is complete. A life dedicated to craft, a career devoted to laughter, and a story that proves that even in the shadows of success, greatness can endure. The laughter Rowan created will echo through time. The lessons he imparted will shape countless lives. And the man himself, ever private, ever brilliant, ever human, will remain an inspiration to anyone who dreams of leaving a mark on the world without losing themselves in the process. Rowan Atkinson's story reminds us all that the greatest art is not just seen, heard, or celebrated. It is felt, remembered, and carried forward by the lives it touches. And in that way, his legacy is eternal. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to Talksperry and comment. Remember, greatness isn't in the spotlight, but in the struggle behind it.